Are we seeing the beginning of Ukraine's counter-offensive to push Russia out of its territory? We've been waiting all year for a spring offensive, but as summer beckons, it seems Ukraine's ground war is finally stepping up as Britain's Foreign Secretary visits Kyiv.
I don't have fighter jets. We need really something to close the sky.
But whilst President Zelensky was asking for more Western military equipment, an exclusive ITV investigation reveals how Russian mercenaries have been using European companies to get past global sanctions to arm themselves at this critical moment. Also in News at 10 tonight. Prince Harry's case against Mirror Group newspapers begins with his lawyers saying no part of his childhood was ever safe from intrusion. The unbearable pain of families identifying their loved ones in India's train disaster. And
so today, I'm excited to announce an entirely new AR platform with a revolutionary new product.
They changed personal computing, smartphones, even how we take photos. Now Apple tries what others have failed to do, making augmented reality part of our daily lives.
This is ITV News at 10 with Rageh Omaar.
Good evening. There is gathering evidence tonight that the preliminary stages to Ukraine's long-expected counteroffensive against Russia may now be underway. Armed with Western high-precision weapons and with global backers growing anxious to see progress, this is a critical moment for Ukraine. However, in the wartime fog of claim and counterclaim, nothing has been confirmed. Kyiv, though, does say it has shifted to what it calls offensive operations in some sectors along the eastern front line. Russian forces are said to have been driven back in two areas. And meanwhile, Moscow says a number of major Ukrainian attacks amounting to what it calls a large-scale assault were beaten back yesterday, claims which Kyiv immediately denounced as Kremlin misinformation. The British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly went to Kyiv today to give President Zelensky a message of support.
Of all the weapons at Ukraine's disposal, secrecy is the one they guard most closely. As this social media campaign makes clear, when it comes to the counter-offensive, their plan is to keep the Russians guessing. So it was Moscow that broke the silence. Their defense ministry said they'd repelled this large-scale offensive in 5 sectors of the Eastern Front. They released dramatic images of the destruction of Ukrainian tanks and said 250 Ukrainian soldiers had been killed. The claims were dismissed as misinformation by Ukraine.
Mr. President.
And there was no word at all of the battlefields at this meeting between President Zelensky and the Foreign Secretary. Just a reminder of what Ukraine's military lack for the fight ahead.
I don't have fighter jets. We need really something to close the sky.
But in places along the 600-mile front line, Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister later confirmed offensive operations are underway. There are reports from pro-Russian officials of Ukrainian attacks in the occupied Donetsk region. In the village of Novoselivka, there is said to have been heavy fighting. 60 miles to the south, Ukrainian forces have advanced in the settlement of Novodonetsk, and in the battered city of Bakhmut, Ukrainian forces also claim to be gaining territory. The battle for Bakhmut is the longest single engagement of the war, but it might now also be the opening exchanges in a much wider offensive.
I think it is very likely that this is the beginning of the spring, now summer offensive, because they couldn't afford to leave it very much longer. They're burning summer as things stand. And although they want more time to prepare, of course they do, The fact is, the longer they leave it, the stronger that Russian defenses will be, the greater will be the expectations in the Western world that they've got to do something with all this equipment they've been given.
This is a war fought in many dimensions. On Russian TV, what appears to be Vladimir Putin announcing martial law and a general mobilization in 3 Russian regions invaded by Ukraine. The Kremlin said it was a deep fake video, that some broadcasters had been hacked. Misinformation and misdirection, both are key components of the battles to come.
And John joins me now. John, you're literally just back from the front lines in Ukraine. So what do you make of what's happening right now with this supposed counteroffensive?
Well, I think some of that deliberate fog of war is beginning to lift, and we're seeing a pattern. When we were on the Eastern Front a week or so ago, we witnessed some of the build-up of Western-supplied armaments, armoury. We saw or we heard of the big missile attacks deep behind Russian lines. I think what we're seeing now, Rageh, is sort of the opening moves in the frontline offensive itself. The Ukrainians are probing, looking for vulnerabilities, testing out what Russia has got. What happens next, whether it's in the next days or the next weeks, is the big unknown. You have Ukraine with its new brigades of fighters, NATO-trained, NATO-supplied, but untried and untested in battle, up against war-weary Russians, but Russians who have spent months and months and months digging pretty impressive defensive positions. Ukraine desperately needs a big win. It needs to show its Western sponsors that victory is possible, but it's a lot easier to defend than to attack.
OK, John, well, I suppose we'll see what happens in the next few days. Well, as the fighting that John was describing along the front line in eastern Ukraine appears to be intensifying, we have uncovered evidence that a group of neo-Nazi mercenaries fighting for Russia is getting sanctions-busting funding. The shadowy Rustich battalion, notorious for its cruel treatment of captive soldiers, has been widely sanctioned by the West. But Rohit has discovered that it received illicit funds from donations routed through online gaming accounts based in the Netherlands, accounts which have since been taken down.
These are the neo-Nazis behind some of the most chilling acts on the battlefield in Ukraine. Tonight, we've uncovered the unlikely route, previously unnoticed, that's helped keep this group going through the galaxy of sanctions designed to stop it. As if its swastika emblem wasn't enough, Task Force Rustich leaves other chilling signatures, slicing off the ears of some of its victims to keep as trophies, driven not just by ideology, but by a need to be more brutal than anyone else. 2014, its first moment of notoriety. It killed dozens of Ukrainian soldiers in this ambush. There's only one living survivor. Painful to recall, but Alexei wants us to know who the Rustich fighters he came face-to-face with really are.
Rustich
are cruel non-humans. It's hard to call them people. And they're not even soldiers. This is a cruel humanoid organism that fights because it gets pleasure from it, that kills with pleasure. It's not a soldier, it is just a killer.
Я нацист. Я нацист.
One of its sanctioned leaders is Alexei Milchikov, filmed here on the front line in Donetsk last summer. But we have evidence of how he's been able to pay for some of his weapons.
This is where the process begins. It's the group's channel on Telegram. They use it to spread propaganda, really graphic videos. And most of the things on here we can't actually show you, but as well as all that, they use this channel to fundraise, occasional appeals for cash, the odd shopping list asking for specific items. Most of their attempts to raise money are through predictable underworld routes, and most have been closed down. But we found this one wide open. This is how supporters of Rustich Group have been able to get their money to the front line.
They've used donation alerts, a platform designed for gaming streamers to make money from their viewers. And here's an example. This image was posted on the Rusic Telegram channel last month by Rageh Omaar, a fundraiser for the group. Alongside him, there's Alexei Milchikov, again the group's leader. He says he's just handed him some goodies. 4 months earlier, Rusic thanked Omaar for the great help to the unit, showing and listing items received, including a shotgun and 2 drones. And how has he been raising money? One method is through his donation alerts account. This shouldn't have been possible, but here's his most recent appeal, posted on the 4th of May. Donation Alerts is owned by a company called My.Games, the publisher of titles like this one. Once part of a Russian tech company, it's now based in Amsterdam. We went to its headquarters, shared space on a business park to try to speak to its executives.
It's Rohit Katru from ITV News.
No success at first. We had other messages to show them, like this one posted on the Rusic channel earlier this month, wishing a happy birthday to friend and fighter Yevgeny Topas, thanking him for his help financially. He used donation alerts to raise money. His most recent appeal was in April.
So this is the consolidated sanctions list of the EU.
We shared what we've uncovered with several of the Netherlands' top sanctions experts.
It would be prohibited to make available funds or economic resources to or for the benefit of him.
Each one said that what we found appears to show violations of the rules to starve Rusic of funds.
I think it's a very clear-cut violation of the sanctions. I don't think we've seen examples as good as this one. I think enforcement should take place. I mean, public prosecutors should investigate, because it's a clear-cut example of a company facilitating the war in Ukraine.
MyGames told us they diligently assessed complaints and that these users violated several clauses of the terms of service, so their accounts have been blocked. And shortly afterwards, one of the Rusic fundraisers announced to his followers that he'd been banned. How much of its multi-million-pound budget was raised using this platform, we don't know. But with the route exposed, almost certainly its fighters are now looking for another. Rohit Katru, News at 10.
Back here, and on the eve of the day he is expected to appear in the witness box, the High Court heard claims Prince Harry was subjected to illegal information gathering right from when he was a young boy. Though the judge did tick him off for not being present at today's start of his individual claim against Mirror Group newspapers, the Prince is expected to be cross-examined tomorrow. His barrister said of the publisher's alleged unlawful activity, nothing was sacrosanct or out of bounds. Mirror Group newspaper is contesting the claims.
In most, if not all, of their coverage of Prince Harry.
The world's cameras, here to record a moment in history, waiting to capture images of a prince who says illegal press intrusion left him paranoid.
It's not grilling Prince Harry, but he's not.
Tomorrow, the Duke of Sussex will become the first senior royal in more than a century to give evidence in court.
The mission of changing the media landscape within the UK from being personal to my life's work.
The Duke of Sussex has said it's his duty to expose alleged criminality by the tabloids. Now he's fulfilling that through the courts.
My father said to me that it was probably a suicide mission to try and change the press.
Over 15 years, from 1996 to 2011, Mirror Group newspapers are accused of publishing articles about Prince Harry gleaned from phone hacking and blagging. Even when he was a schoolboy, even after the death of his mother, it's claimed nothing was sacrosanct. Every facet of his private life published in full Technicolor glory, it's claimed, because the stories drove sales. For example, this front-page exclusive about him being diagnosed with glandular fever, or this double-page spread about an argument with his brother Prince William, or the constant stream of stories about his relationship with Chelsea Davy, the strain eventually leading her to decide a royal life was not for her. The court heard Princess Diana was a huge target for Mirror Group newspapers, and her intercepted messages would have included information about the young prince. The court was shown a letter she wrote to Michael Barrymore shortly before her death, in which she described having a nightmare time with the tabloids.
Prince Harry flew in from LA last night after his daughter Lilibet's birthday. The judge said he was a little surprised he's not here today, just in case there was time this afternoon for him to begin giving evidence, with the defence barrister claiming it could waste court time. When he does appear tomorrow, he'll be cross-examined for a day and a half, facing tough and awkward questions, the very opposite of the royal family's mantra to never complain, never explain.
The barrister for Mirror Group newspapers says there's no evidence the Duke of Sussex was hacked, let alone on a habitual basis. Tomorrow, they'll come face to face in court to persuade the judge who he should believe. Rebecca Barry, News at 10.
Rishi Sunak arrived in Dover today to lead government claims that its efforts to crack down on illegal channel crossings are beginning to bear fruit. And he added that 2 more offshore barges will house another 1,000 asylum seekers. Labour, however, said that the government had totally lost any grip on the worsening asylum backlog.
We're talking to the team about it. Actually, the number of arrests over the last year has gone up considerably.
Positivity from Rishi Sunak as he continues his quest to stop the boats, a pledge which may define his time in office. This morning he was out in the Channel on patrol with a Border Force boat, insistent that his plan to stop crossings is working.
For the first time, crossings are down by 20%. But we are not complacent. This won't be solved overnight, and people will continue to come this summer, which is why it is so important that we change the law.
The official target is to stop the boats completely, and the number of arrivals has fallen by 20% compared to this time last year. But it's still more than 4 times higher than it was 3 years ago. Meanwhile, the total number of people waiting for their asylum applications is still high. It sits at more than 137,000. That's gone up by more than 1,000 since December. Experts say the drop in crossings might not be down to the government alone.
Past research suggests that policy is one factor that affects the number of people, but it's usually not the most important. Other random things like how many people are being displaced from different countries around the world, or the weather, or even just how information flows through networks can have a really important impact.
The government is working through a backlog of old asylum cases, which they say are down by 1/5 since December. But with every new crossing, pressure on the system grows. Today, the Prime Minister said 2 more barges had been secured to help house asylum seekers. This woman, who wants to remain anonymous, has been waiting for a decision on her asylum claim for more than half a year.
I battle with depression most of the time because, one, it's not like you even know your next move. It's not like you know how long you will stay there.
In particular, the government has highlighted the number of crossings from Albania. It signed a deal with the country, which has now seen the numbers fall 90%. The Labour leader says more of those agreements are needed.
At the moment, the government's baked in a problem, which is because they haven't got returns agreements with other countries, because they're not tackling this upstream with cross-border criminal activity being absolutely dealt with, and because they're not processing the claims quickly enough, they're building an ever-growing problem.
Rishi Sunak's pledge to stop the boats is integral to his success, and even though he won't give us a deadline of when he wants to meet that target, he'll want it done soon. Shihab Khan, News at 10, Dover.
An inquest heard today that 2 young people who lost their lives after being pulled from the sea at Bournemouth died from drowning. It is being suggested that 12-year-old Suna Khan on the left here and Joe Abbas, who was 17, may have got into difficulty after being caught in a riptide. They were rescued from the water, but both later died in hospital. The hearing was adjourned until September. Now, many families of the 275 people who died in the Indian train crash disaster are still tonight waiting to claim the remains of their loved ones. The country's rail authorities are pressing for a criminal investigation into the horrific pileup involving 2 express trains and a stationary goods train. Hundreds of relatives have made the long and arduous journey to a hospital in the eastern province of Odisha to examine photographs of the bodies.
The pictures in this photo album are too graphic for us to show you, but Anil Marandi had to study each and every grim image in the search for his relatives. There are so many dead bodies from Friday's train crash that the authorities have collated pictures of them in books and on posters, so families might identify their loved ones faster. Anil drove for 10 hours to get here to find his brother-in-law and 2 cousins who were brothers. With their identification papers, he eventually got to the front of the queue to look through records on the computer. Sadly, there was a match. One of his cousins confirmed dead. While relatives were still trying to establish who was dead or alive, trains started running again on the tracks where the tragedy happened. Passengers peering at the mangled wreckage discarded on the embankment. The government has blamed signal failure for the catastrophic derailment, but whether it was mechanical or human error has not yet been established. The railways, however compromised, are a critical means of transport in India, and that's why services have resumed before questions have been answered. Compensation has been paid out just as quickly. Tuni Singh broke down in tears after receiving her £10,000 payout. Her husband Kirtan was killed in the crash, leaving her a widow and their 2 children without a father. He was also the sole breadwinner in the family. Her husband called her after he boarded the train on Friday to say it was very crowded and he'd phone when he arrived in Chennai. It was a conversation they'd had many times before, but those words were to be his last. Debbie Edward, News at 10.
The tragic consequences of India's train disaster. Well, back here, a prominent Conservative backbencher was today charged by police with a racially aggravated public order offence. Bob Stewart, the MP for Beckenham in the southeast of London, is said to have racially abused a man during a demonstration last December. And Carl is with me. Carl, what's the background to this?
So Bob Stewart, who is the chairman of Parliament's all-party group on Bahrain, was outside an event hosted by the Bahraini embassy when he was shouted at by a human rights activist, a man called Syed Al-Wadi. Mr. Al-Wadi says that he is living in exile from Bahrain here after being tortured by the government there. The exchange, which we are showing, but we're not playing the audio of it, the exchange went on for a short time. It became quite heated. And Mr. Stewart is alleged to have told Mr. Al-Wadi to go back to Bahrain. He then made a complaint to the police, and they've charged Bob Stewart with a racially aggravated public order offence and also with using threatening or abusive words or behaviour. Magistrates at Westminster Magistrates Court will choose which, if any of those charges to go ahead with on July the 5th. Now, one thing that has not happened is Mr. Stewart has not joined the ever-growing group of independent MPs sitting in Parliament, many of whom have been suspended from their parties pending various investigations. But the Conservative Party say they've not suspended him because he is clear that he regrets his comments and he will be fighting the charges that have been levelled against him. OK, in exactly a month's time. Carl, thanks very much indeed. Now, Holly Willoughby today spoke about the fallout from Philip Schofield's departure from ITV's This Morning. Miss Willoughby was speaking on her first return to the programme since his resignation.
I imagine that you might have been feeling a lot like I have. Shaken, troubled, let down, worried for the well-being of people on all sides of what's been going on, and full of questions. You, me, and all of us at This Morning gave our love and support to someone who was not telling the truth. who acted in a way that they themselves felt that they had to resign from ITV and step down from a career that they loved.
Now, Scotland's SNP government is likely to react with fury tonight at what it sees as the latest move by the government in Westminster to block its policy plans. The SNP wants to include glass bottles in a scheme to make customers pay a returnable deposit on most drinks containers to encourage recycling and cut waste. Known as the Deposit Return Scheme, it means people get 20p refunded when each empty container is handed back. But in a letter tonight, the UK ministers said no to including glass bottles.
Each of these bottles would require a specific label if Scotland's deposit return scheme was allowed to go ahead as planned. But with Westminster's ruling to exclude glass, this business wouldn't have to sign up. It's causing a stir and leaving producers with more questions than answers.
You can't operate if you don't know what's going to happen, especially we've just come out of a pandemic, which we're lucky to have survived. A lot of hospitality was hit really, really hard with it. So financially, how are we supposed to prepare for this when we don't actually know what we're preparing for?
Under the scheme, consumers would pay a deposit when buying a drink in a single-use container. In Scotland, that's been set at 20 pence. When the packaging is returned, so is the deposit, and the container is then recycled. Scotland wants to introduce the scheme next year, but the UK government has said that it can only go ahead if glass is excluded, to match the initiative in England due to begin in 2025.
As recent as January this year, the UK government were consulting about inclusion of glass within the English scheme. The Welsh scheme also, of course, with the inclusion of glass. Is the UK government here, is the English scheme, that is the potential outlier.
The devolved nations feel this is an attack on their powers, but Westminster says they are the ones listening to the businesses.
It has been the case that the businesses with whom the Scottish Government have been interacting have been uniform and loud and clear in their determination to ensure that this scheme works interoperably across the whole United Kingdom.
An estimated £300 million has been spent so far on the scheme in Scotland, but tomorrow they'll decide whether the removal of glass is the final straw. Louise Scott, News at 10.
And finally, it's long been the stuff of sci-fi fantasy films, a world where people can easily interact with a mix of reality and the digital world. And with the advance of online technology, there have been several attempts to make that kind of experience available to the public. But tonight, claims are being made that with the launch of a new headset by Apple, the moment for augmented reality really has finally arrived. But at a price, of course.
Introducing Apple Vision Pro.
When Apple launches a new product, the tech industry pays attention. Their new Vision Pro headset combines virtual and augmented reality experiences. Headsets aren't new, but Apple hopes blending the real and virtual world will prove a winning formula.
You browse the system simply by looking. Simply tap your fingers together to select and gently flick to scroll.
Augmented reality superimposes virtual objects in the world around us, enabling us to mix reality with virtual reality by looking through a screen.
Apple Vision Pro will introduce us to spatial computing. This marks the beginning of a journey that will bring a new dimension to powerful personal technology.
At this virtual reality gaming centre, they were indulging in a spot of zombie apocalypse today. The business behind it says VR's future looks bright.
I'd say since the last 4 years, the interest in virtuality has grown massively. I think there's still a lot more people who haven't done VR than have, which is where we come into play. And to be fair, I think it would really benefit people like Apple and the manufacturers.
Facebook's metaverse has tried to crack the virtual world. Google Glass has tried to capture reality. But Apple hope this is a game changer.
Global sales of headsets fell by 54% last year, according to one industry estimate. But Apple say they're determined to succeed, where others have so far failed.
I was really, really interested in the fact that Apple were very firmly marketing this device as an augmented reality device, you know, overlaying digital information into your real world rather than focusing on, you know, transporting you into a totally virtual environment.
When someone is nearby, they will appear in your view.
A Vision Pro headset will cost around £2,400. Maybe best to hide your banking app if you buy one, if you don't want to be reminded of that while sitting on the sofa. Neil Connery, News at 10.
Very pricey. And that's it for tonight from me and the rest of the team here. Thanks for watching. Good night.